Thank you very much for that gracious introduction, which you read basically as I wrote for you. And I'm delighted to be here tonight. I hope you can all hear up there in the balconies. Can you all hear up there in the balconies? I've been speaking recently before more dead mics than an Irish undertaker, and I want to make sure that you're all plugged in with me tonight. I come from Orlando, Florida, which is dreams. The dream in Orlando started about 30 years ago. Who took a, he looked down over a citrus and he said, I could dream coming out of that area a gigantic castle where young people from all over the world will come and have an entertainment experience of a lifetime. And then the plane banked a little to the left and he looked down over a lake area and said, around a lake like that, I could picture the nations of the world building monuments to their countries so that the people of the world could learn more about the other countries. And then the plane came over a marshy bogland and the man looked down and said, I could picture a working movie studio coming out of that area where people could come and learn all about the fascinating world of film. Listen, it would have been an incredible experience for all of us to have been on that plane that day with Walt Disney as he looked down and made those statements. The man at that point said, if you can dream it, you can do it. And the end result is that Orlando is now the #1 tourist destination in the world. There are more hotel rooms in Orlando, Florida than any city in America. And it continues to grow and grow and grow as the result of one man's dream. I want to encourage all of you here for this weekend to continue to grow in your dreams. One of our best-known first ladies, Eleanor Roosevelt, said, the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. And another magnificent young woman who 8 years ago gave her life in the Challenger space disaster also believed that. Krista McAuliffe was a school teacher in Concord, New Hampshire. And if we could get in her classroom tonight, room 305 at Concord, New Hampshire High School, we would see one memory of her life. It's a poster with pictures and names of the astronauts who gave their life that day in January of 1986. And at the bottom of the poster are these words, if you have a dream, don't let anything dim it. As I stand to share with you tonight, I can't help but think of two other people who had a dream, two businessmen from Grand Rapids, Michigan, who in 1959, sitting in the kitchen one day, discussed how vitamins could be sold more effectively and how different things could be sold to people who had need of good quality products, and whoever could have imagined, as a result of Rich DeVos and Jay Van Andel's dream, what the Amway Corporation has become and what it can become. So it's great to have dreams, and I encourage you in all of your dreams, but I want to caution you tonight that dreams have a tendency to float out into the sky. Dreams have a tendency to never become reality unless you build a ladder to your dreams. And you ask me the question, how do you build a ladder to your dreams? Well, you build it exactly the way you would build a ladder to paint the side of your house if you had to do that this weekend. You would build that ladder one rung at a time. And by the same token, if you want all of your dreams to come true, you've got to build a ladder one rung at a time. And that's what I want to do for you tonight. And as I build this ladder, I want to tell you in advance, it comes with a money-back guarantee that every one of your dreams can become a reality and will become a reality if you build this ladder with me in a strong, stable manner tonight. The first rung of the ladder, at the very base of the ladder, simply says this: if you want your dreams to come true, you've got to think the right kind of thoughts. Because what you think about has a way of becoming true in your life. When you think about it, really, every single act that has started in our lives or in the history of the world, every act of kindness and contribution started as a tiny thought in the mind of some man or some woman. And by the same token, every act of war and evil and violence also started in the mind, right here in the person's thought process, as a tiny embryonic thought. What you think about all day long ultimately will become reality. In other words, we are what we think. You sow a thought and you reap an action. You sow an action and you reap a habit. You sow a habit and you reap a character. Sow a character and you reap a destiny, and therefore your destiny and my destiny begins with what we think about all day long. The writer William Arthur Ward put it this way. He said, we control our thoughts or our thoughts control us. We rule our passions or our passions rule us. We govern our habits or our habits govern us. So I want to encourage you, if you want your dreams to come true in the Amway business or any other phase of your life, you've got to think the right kind of thoughts. I have a great respect for Mike Krzyzewski, the basketball coach at Duke University, and he put it this way. He said, if you put a plant in a jar, it will grow to take the shape of the jar. Let it grow by itself, and it may grow so 20 jars cannot hold it. The point I want to make is very simply this. You cannot allow any life-limiting thoughts to enter your mind, either as to what you can accomplish in your life or what those people around you, depending on you, can accomplish in their lives, because nobody knows what they're capable of doing. But sadly, we are all very much like trained fleas at the county fair. I don't know whether you've ever seen them, but it's fascinating. If you're very observant, you will notice that these fleas are in a jar and there's no lid on top of the jar. So the obvious question is, why don't the fleas just jump out of their containers so they can have freedom? The answer is simple, because the flea trainer originally, in working with them, put them inside of the jar. He put a clear plastic lid on top. The fleas began jumping up and down, bashing their little flea brains on that plastic lid on top, and after enough Excedrin headache experiences like that, they stopped jumping quite so high so that they could enjoy their newfound comfort. And at that point, the trainer was able to remove the lid, and forevermore, those fleas would be contained inside the jar, no longer by a lid on top, but by a mindset that says so high and no more. And unfortunately, there are many people running around. You run into them all the time. There are many universities, there are many businesses. Listen, there are many nations in this world who, because of hindering circumstances in their past, perhaps where they grew up or where their parents were, or because of their education, or because of their environment, or because of poor potty training, or having to eat spinach when they were 5 years old, their minds simply are clamped down and they can't do it. They are restricted in their thinking. And if that begins to infiltrate your organizations, those organizations are in deep trouble. We need to have freed up minds as to what we're capable of accomplishing. We have learned that in our own home in the adoption of some of these children. It was about 5.5 years ago we adopted 4 brothers from the Philippines in one fell swoop. They had been in an orphanage in Mindanao, the southernmost island of the Philippines, for a number of years, doing who knows what and thinking who knows what. We gave them about 1 day to get organized and adjusted, and then threw them into life in Orlando. And their reaction to almost everything was, we can't do that. Be it school or activities, we can't do it. Little minds were just clamped down. One of the things we did was get them over to the swimming pool at Rollins College to start youth swimming, which we have our kids do. And I'll never forget these 4 boys going down for the 3rd time. You could hear them blubbering out, we can't swim. We threw them anvils to try and save them, but it was interesting. This past year, 3 of them came home having qualified to swim in the Junior Olympics, among the top youth swimmers in the state of Florida. And really, all that had happened with those boys was that their minds had gotten freed up. The restrictions were shattered. Talent and hard work began to come into the equation, but they now began to believe that they could do it. This past Christmas, we adopted our 17th and 18th children, a boy and a girl from Brazil. The little girl is 10, the boy is 8, and I got him immediately into basketball at the YMCA. His name is Alan, and in his very first basketball game that he played was probably the first one he ever saw, and it was a fascinating experience to watch him with his little green shirt on, running up and down the court. It was a combination of basketball, football, soccer, volleyball. I mean, whatever he needed to do, he did it. And at some point in the contest, he got out in front of the pack. He was racing down the floor, dribbling every 3rd step. He leaped up into the air, threw the ball up in the air. Somehow it banked off the backboard and down through the basket. He had scored a basket. I mean, you want to talk about an excited kid. He came home after the game just chattering away a mile a minute in Portuguese. My wife understood enough Portuguese to translate for me. And after the whole diatribe in which he described this thing, I heard one phrase at the end, which I kind of got curious about. I heard him say, "Quasi Michael Jordan." And I said, "Jill, what did he say?" And he said, "I'm almost Michael Jordan." And you know, that really hit me hard, that this little kid who'd been running around on the streets of Sao Paulo, you know, just trying to carve out an existence, in the course of this basketball game, he began in his mind to envision himself as Michael Jordan. And who knows? I mean, how do we know what he might be capable of accomplishing? All I'm saying is, folks, we don't know what people's capabilities are. We don't know what they can accomplish. And therefore, none of us should be instilling life-limiting thoughts into anybody's mind, because there is no telling what we're capable of doing. Ray Harlan tells a wonderful story about the fact that in any area of life we need a constant flow of new ideas, just like we need improved mousetraps to solve a terrible but little-known problem we're facing in the country, and that is that the IQ of mice is skyrocketing. Consider this: when you discover a mouse in your house, what do? You probably go to the store, you buy a conventional mousetrap, you take it home, you bait it, you go to bed, and when you check in the morning, one of three things has happened. Either the mouse took the night off and the trap is undisturbed, or a smart mouse came along, tripped the trap, and ate the bait. The smart mice have trained us to feed them every night on a mouse trap, a fine wooden platter, so they don't have to forage anymore. And the other possibility is that a dumb mouse came along and got nailed in the trap. So now you've got a dead mouse to dispose of. And this illustrates the problem, he says. The dumb mice keep getting cut off in the prime of life. The smart mice get to live and reproduce. So by the laws of genetics, each generation of mice is now smarter than the one before. And then he closes by saying this type of trap has been around for 150 years. If it is used without modification much longer, our descendants will be contending with a plague of genius mice. And that's why we have to keep inventing better mouse traps and better ways of doing everything else we do. So the bottom line is, share your suggestions and join in the struggle against ever shrewder mice glitching up what we do. So folks, the first rung of the ladder simply says, if you want your dreams to come true, you've got to think the right kind of thoughts. The second rung of the ladder says that if you want your dreams to become a reality, you've got to say the right kind of words, because what you say also is going to become a reality in your life. And I am convinced that the most important words in the English language are those same words that I am trying to get 18 children in our home to use on a regular basis, because they are the words that oil the mechanism between human beings. And the words are please and I'm sorry and you're welcome and thank you and I love you and I'm praying for you. Those are the words that make relationships work. It is important that we say the right kind of words. One of the challenges that we will throw out to our children from time to time is the 90-day test, which works very simply. For 90 consecutive days, the only words that can leave your lips are those words which are uplifting and kind and gentle and soft and optimistic and hopeful and loving. They're the only words that can leave your lips. And if at anywhere in the 90 days you blow it, you've got to go back to day one and start all over again. But I can tell you in advance, if you can pull this off and get to the end of the 90 days successfully, every relationship you have will be so dramatically changed that you're never going to want to go back and do it the other way. The Apostle Paul was correct when he says in Ephesians 4:29, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouths. Let no harmful or damaging communication leave your lips, but only that which is good for the use of edifying. It was interesting to hear Pam a few minutes ago talk about the word edifying. It's a Greek term. And in the original Greek language, it did not mean to preach a sermon at, but it was tied to troops about to go into battle. And edifying was a word to build up or support or to provide undergirding. That's what it meant in the original Greek language. And I think all of you, as I have, discovered that this world we are living in is not a playground out there. It is not a playground at all. It is a battleground. And everybody we encounter, everybody we run into all day long is fighting some battle, carrying some heavy burden. And so when an edifier comes along who understands the importance of using the right kind of words, that person will never be forgotten. I think Mark Twain hit it well when he said, most of us can run pretty well all day long on one good compliment. He understood that encouragement is as vital to the soul as oxygen is to the body. I mentioned that Orlando is the city of dreams. Well, another dream that has become a reality in Orlando is SeaWorld. Our kids love to visit SeaWorld to see what men and women have done. They have learned how to tame killer whales and porpoises and walruses and sea lions and seals and alligators and otters, and it's incredible. I mean, men and women have learned how to tame Flipper and Shamu and Lassie and Rin Tin Tin. But the one thing that men and women have never learned to tame is that slippery piece of membrane, mucous membrane, lodged behind two glimmering white rows of ivory, situated lower front position of our faces. And I'm talking about the human tongue. But once we can do that, folks, we then have a chance to have our dreams to become a reality. I love to read Larry King in the USA Today on Monday mornings. He does that little note column, and not long ago, Larry King, who is a great baseball fan, said, if I were a baseball player today, I'd want Tommy Lasorda for a manager. Why? Because I want to be hugged, I want to be comforted, and I want to be told, Larry, you're the best. Tommy understands the importance of saying the right kind of words. A friend for many years is Bill Glass, the longtime professional football player who has had a prison ministry for the last 20 years. He has been in every prison, every major prison in the United States of America. And Bill Glass told me not long ago that every single prisoner that he has encountered over the years had a father problem. He had a problem with his father as a youngster growing up. And then Bill said to me one day, he said, Pat, with all of those children, there are three things that your kids must hear, or they're going to end up having a bubble in their soul and an emptiness is going to set in. He said, they need to hear from you consistently. Number one, you belong to me and I'm glad. Secondly, you're a winner and I'm proud of you. And thirdly, you have value and I delight in you. It is important that we say the right kind of words. I'll tell you who really understood that clearly and had an influence on me is Chuck Daly, the longtime coach of the Pistons, who won a couple of championships there, coached our dream team in the Olympics in 1992. I mean, can you imagine sitting on the bench and coaching Larry Bird and Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan and Charles Barkley and Patrick Ewing and David Robinson and Karl Malone and just waving these guys in? It's incredible to think about. But after he won a championship in Detroit, somebody went up to Chuck Daly and said, Coach, talk about your life and influences in your life, things that you remember. And Chuck said, let me tell you a story. He said, I'm teaching a philosophy class at Duke University years ago. Some students, some athletes. We meet in a room between two handball courts, and I'm in there one day, and I'm telling everyone, you can get on the players. He said, that's okay, because once you leave the court, it's all over. It's forgotten. And this football player gets right up and says, that's not right. It's not forgotten, because whatever you say is remembered. You can't get on a player 1 minute and expect him to forget it in the next minute. And then Chuck said this. He said, the guy caught me by surprise, but that statement, what he had to say that day, has meant as much to me as anything I've ever heard in my life. I learned more in those few moments than at any other time in my life. It was interesting. About 6 weeks ago, I was speaking in Hickory, North Carolina. And before I got up to speak, a man came up and introduced himself to me. It was a friend, an older friend, but I had not seen him in 40 years. His name was Jim Rowell. He was an outstanding baseball player and athlete at Haverford School in Philadelphia. He went on to the University of North Carolina, was an All-American pitcher there. He spent 5 years in the Detroit Tigers system, now a businessman in Hickory, North Carolina. And we got to reminiscing about his high school career where my uncle coached him. And he talked about the best game that he ever pitched, a 16-inning game against a school called Friends Central. He won the game 1-0. He had a perfect game for 10 innings. Top of the 11th, he walked the first batter. And I said to Jimmy, Jimmy, that's an incredible performance. What do you most remember about that game? And he looked at me, he said, I shouldn't say this. He said, but what I most remember about that game is afterwards my dad coming up to me and saying, why'd you walk that first guy in the 11th inning? And he said, I'm 59 years old, but I can still hear my dad saying that to me. That's what I most remember about that game. Folks, the words that we say are important, vitally important. I shared that story about a month ago at a convention in Puerto Rico, and afterwards a man came up to me, and I could see his lips quivering a little bit, and he said, I need to tell you a story. He said, I was a place kicker for the University of South Carolina. He says, as a junior against North Carolina State, I kicked a 52-yard field goal, which was a school record for many years at South Carolina. There were just 11 seconds left in the first half when I did it. And in the locker room at the halftime of that game, I ended up next to my coach, Paul Dietzel, in the men's room, and he looked over at me and he said, well, Tommy, you got lucky, didn't you? And he may not have meant anything by it, but Tommy Bell, whose name was the kicker, came up to me and said, I was so devastated by those words. He said, I never again was the same kicker because I spent the rest of my career trying to show Coach Dietzel that I wasn't lucky. The words that we say are vitally important. Charles Schwab, the great industrialist, put it this way. He said, I have yet to find the person who did not do better work or put forth greater effort under a spirit of approval than under a spirit of criticism. Saying the right kind of words. The third rung of this ladder that we must put in place if our dreams are going to become a reality is simply this. You've got to be specific in goal setting if you want your dreams to become a reality. You've got to be specific in goal setting, because a clear-cut, definite goal is a powerful, motivating force to get anything done. And I want to suggest to you tonight that you need to write down short-term, mid-range, and long-term goals in 4 areas of your life. The spiritual area, the family area, the professional area, and the area of health. I think those are the 4 areas where you need specific goals. D.L. Moody, the great evangelist of the last century, said, give me a man who says this one thing I do and not these things I dabble with. He understood the importance of goal setting, of honing in on targets that you want to accomplish. Benjamin Disraeli, the great statesman, said the secret of success is constancy of purpose. That's how you get it done. I obviously do not have time tonight to develop this whole area of goal setting, but I do want to share with you a lesson I learned many years ago in my first year in the National Basketball Association that really has focused me on goal setting more than anything that's ever happened to me. I was with the 76ers. The owner of that team, a man named Irv Kozloff, was talking to me one day, and he simply said this. He said, Pat, if you're going to make it as an executive in pro basketball, you've got to ask yourself 2 questions every minute of every day. Question number 1, what am I doing right now to help the 76ers win more games? Question number 2, what am I doing right now to help the 76ers sell more tickets? And if what you're doing doesn't fall under one of those 2 headings, you're off on a side road, you're off on a tangent, and you're going to get yourself completely fouled up, and you've got to get back on the main road and start shooting for the goals that this profession is all about. Joe Paterno, who is the head coach in football at Penn State University, said, set short-term goals and you'll win games. Set long-term goals and you'll win championships. I think Coach Paterno understood that a goal is a dream with a deadline. And without that, none of our dreams, be it in the Amway business or any other area of our life, are going to become a reality. Now, I need to tell you something in advance. It's important to have goals. You can certainly talk about them. You all believe in them. But without one quality in your life, goals are going to absolutely disappear. They are never going to become an important part of your life. And here is the key word. The key word is discipline. Without discipline, you cannot be a good goal setter. More specifically, it's self-discipline. Bum Phillips, the longtime NFL coach, put it this way. He said, the only kind of discipline that lasts is self-discipline. And that's what makes goals become actualities. Maybe I can put it to you another way using an illustration from the lips of Bobby Knight, the basketball coach at Indiana University. Now, this may be the first time that Bobby Knight has ever been used as a sermon illustration at an Amway rally. But Bobby Knight put it this way. He said, discipline number 1 is doing what needs to be done. Discipline number 2 is doing it when it needs to be done. Discipline number 3 is doing it the best it can be done. And discipline number 4 is doing it that way every time you do it. That's a powerful concept. I'm telling you, whether you're raising kids, running a sports team, coaching a Little League baseball team, running your Amway business, discipline is doing what needs to be done, doing it when it needs to be done, doing it the best it can be done, and doing it that way every time you do it. The 4th rung of our ladder says that if you want your dreams to become a reality, you have to be responsible. You and I are responsible for both the victories and the failures in our life. We're not responsible for all the things that happen to us, but we are responsible for how we respond, how we react. You and I are responsible. This is not a very popular concept. I mean, most people go through life saying that if it works out okay and if everything is good at the end, I was responsible. If it all falls apart and blows up, I had nothing to do with it. I don't know anything about it. We run into that in our home all the time. Cookies are missing. Something's broken. Something's taken out of another kid's room. And all of a sudden, I mean, you want to talk about kids vanishing and knowing nothing about it. I mean, they're not responsible. They know nothing. Casper the ghost did it. Does Casper live in your home also? You know about Casper, right? And so I guess it really comes down to those words that President Kennedy used years ago, that success has 1,000 authors and failure is an orphan. But you and I, if our dreams are going to become a reality, must be responsible. Mary Crowley, one of the most successful businesswomen in the history of our nation, put it this way. She said, there are 10 two-letter words that will change your life. If it is to be, it is up to me. You and I are responsible. It was a number of years ago. I was still back in Philadelphia. We had won the first pick in the draft that year, and we were researching a center from North Carolina in Chapel Hill named Brad Daugherty, who is now with the Cleveland Cavaliers. And as we interviewed him, we were very, very interested in what Coach Dean Smith does in working with those players at Chapel Hill. They have a unique relationship. And we asked Brad about it, and he said, Coach Smith teaches us that from the time we come here to Chapel Hill, we're responsible, first of all, to get up in the morning by ourselves. And we're responsible to go to class every day. And we're responsible to get to practice on time. And we are responsible to get our degrees, and we're responsible to go out and get a job. We are responsible. That's what he teaches us. And it was long about that time that John Thompson, meek and mild John Thompson at Georgetown University, was approached about the problem on college campuses about young players just playing ball and not graduating and being used before they could get degrees. And Coach Thompson said, I'm sick and tired of hearing, Coach, you caused Johnny to flunk. I tell my players, chump, the education is here. I'm going to support you for the education, but it is your responsibility to get the education for yourself. I mentioned to you about Mike Krzyzewski at Duke. He believes very strongly in this area of responsibility. He said not long ago that the most mature human being is the one who takes responsibility for all his actions and can say, this was well done and I did it, and this was done poorly and I did it. If you can take responsibility for both, you can go on to the next thing because you're more even-keeled. He said, my outlook comes from West Point when I was a cadet. My players get tired of all my West Point stories, but I tell them when you're a plebe up there, the upperclassmen yell at you a lot, and you have only 3 answers. Yes, sir, no, sir, and no excuse, sir. So you can be walking out of a room and your shoes are supposed to be shined all the time, and you're with your roommate who walks through a puddle of water and splashes some of it on your shoes. 2 steps later, an upperclassman says, halt. He looks down at your shoes and asks, why are your shoes so muddy? And you can't just say, hey man, I was walking down here and my roommate, no. You have to say, no excuses, sir, because the fact is your shoes are muddy. Whose responsibility? Your responsibility. So when you're out on the court and you throw a pass, it's your responsibility. I hate basketball players who say, hey man, you were supposed to catch that. And I say, did you help the player get in the right position or in the frame of mind so that he could catch it? Maybe I can just best summarize it in the word of Richard Evans, who said, if you don't want it in the paper, then don't do it. If you don't want to be quoted, if you don't want it repeated, don't say it. And we might also add, if you don't want it on your conscience, don't do it. If you don't want it in your life at all, then don't do it, because we live in a world of causes and consequences. Our record is always with us. If you don't want it printed or repeated or to become a permanent part of the record of your life, don't do it, don't say it. You and I are responsible. There's a fifth rung on the ladder I want to share with you if your dreams are going to become a reality. And this rung simply says this: if you want your dreams to come true, you've got to seek out the right kind of friends. Because who you spend your time with and who you surround yourself with will determine what becomes of you. We wisely tell our children that their friends will have profound effects upon them. Folks, I want to tell you that equally important, our friends will have the same profound effects upon us. Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, put it this way in Proverbs 17:17. He said, "As iron sharpeneth iron, so a man sharpeneth the countenance of his friend." You and I are shaped and molded and influenced by those people that we surround ourselves with. You see, temptation comes when we choose wrong company. There is nothing that shapes our character more than the people with whom we choose to spend our time. You get around a bunch of upbeat, enthusiastic, excited, dynamic, optimistic people, they're going to make you like them. They're going to lift you up, and you're going to become that same kind of person. You get around a bunch of downtrodden, negative, defeated, pessimistic, down-in-the-mouth people, listen, in a matter of days, you'll be just like those people. Because whether you realize it or not, human beings are like apples in a barrel. You get a beautiful bushel barrel of Michigan apples, 99 good ones, one rotten one right there in the middle. In an incredibly brief period of time, that one rotten apple will pollute the whole bushel barrel. I mean, you can sit it there for a month and all the good ones will never change that one bad one. And so the end result is people are the same way. There is no doubt that we are influenced by the company that we keep. Solomon wrote in Proverbs 13:20, "He who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will be destroyed." So you see, we have an uncanny way of taking on the attitudes and the traits of our associates. Casey Stengel, the longtime manager of the New York Yankees, understood this. He was talking about the powers of associations on a ball player's attitude, and he was telling Billy Martin about this when Billy was a rookie manager. Casey said there would be 15 players on your team who will run through a wall for you, 5 who will hate you, and 5 who are undecided. And then Stengel added, "Billy, when you make out your rooming list, always room your losers together. Never room a good guy with a loser. Those losers will stay together. They're going to blame the manager for everything, but it won't spread if you keep them isolated." About 2 years ago, right after the DeVos family bought the Orlando Magic, we hosted the NBA All-Star Game in Orlando, and Rich DeVos was asked to speak at the All-Star Chapel service in Orlando that day. And he started talking about an encounter he had had with Walt Disney years ago. And he remembered that Walt Disney commented that there are 3 kinds of people in the world. First of all, there are well poisoners. These are people who dump on you, tell you what you can't do, tell the world about everything that is wrong. That's the first kind, well poisoners. The second kind of people are lawn mowers. These are well-intentioned people. They tend to their own needs. They're right there in their backyards. They never leave their yards, and that's who they are. They're lawn mowers. We have a lot of lawn mowers in this country, and we need them. But there's a third kind of people that Walt Disney talked about, and that is life enhancers. And those are the people that we need. People who reach out to enrich the lives of others and lift them up and build them up and send them on their way and enhancing the life of others. And that's who you need to constantly surround yourself with, because they're going to influence you in a dramatic way. The 6th rung of the ladder simply says this: if you want your dreams to come true, you've got to take your hurts and learn how to handle your hurts and make them into your strengths. We're going to encounter those setbacks. We're going to encounter defeats. We're going to have all sorts of problems in life. If they haven't hit you yet, folks, they're coming. Just be patient. They're on the way. And how we deal with them, how we look at them, how we adjust to them is going to determine whether we're going to be successful or not. Helen Keller, the remarkable blind woman, put it this way. She said, "Face your deficiencies and acknowledge them, but do not let them master you. Let them teach you patience, sweetness, and insight." Winston Churchill years ago said, "Difficulties mastered are opportunities won." And I love the words of Walter Annenberg, who founded TV Guide. He said, "I earnestly believe that people who are not subjected to some adversity usually end up as well-fed house dogs." I don't know whether you have ever heard Chuck Swindoll tell the story about the oyster and its pearl. but he commented that pearls are the product of pain. For some unknown reason, the shell of the oyster gets pierced and an alien substance, perhaps a grain of sand, slips inside. And on the entry of that foreign irritant, all the resources within the tiny, sensitive oyster rush to the spot. They begin releasing a healing fluid called mother of pearl that otherwise would have remained dormant. And after a while, the irritant is covered, the wound is healed by a pearl. No other gem has so fascinating a history because it's a symbol of stress, it's a healed wound, it's a precious tiny jewel that was conceived through irritation, born out of adversity, nursed by adjustments. And had there been no wounding, no irritating interruption, there could have been no pearl. And as you know, some oysters are never wounded, and those who seek for gems simply toss them aside because they are fit only for an oyster stew. So I want to encourage you, as the problems and the difficulties and the heartache of life hit, look upon it as a way to turn that difficulty and that setback into a strength. Right after the death of President Nixon, Tom Weir in USA Today wrote, when Coach George Allen was writing strategies for winning, Richard Nixon was asked to submit a letter on what motivated him. Nixon recalled the words that a friend sent to him after Nixon lost the 1960 presidential election about what a Stanford professor told that university's football team after it was upset in the 1935 Rose Bowl. Defeats are poison to some men. Great men have become mediocre because of the inability to accept and abide by a defeat. If you should achieve any kind of success and develop superior qualities as a man, chances are it will be because of the manner in which you met defeats that will come to you as they come to everyone. The seventh rung of our ladder. The seventh rung of the ladder says that if you want your dreams to come true, you've got to learn how to go the second mile. You've got to become a second miler. You've got to do twice what is expected of you. In other words, it is hard work and shoe leather that makes dreams become a reality. Some of you may be involved with Amway in the very early stages. I want to tell you that it's very important that you do not get tricked or you get misled by saying, you can dabble in this industry, you can play around with it a little bit and make a whole ton of money. Don't get fooled by that. It's hard work that bears fruit. There are no free lunches in our society, and second milers are those that make it. This is a principle that has been around for a long time. 2,000 years ago, Rome was the dominating nation on earth. They had conquered every land in sight, and the minute that they conquered a nation, they immediately enslaved all of the inhabitants. One of the nations that Rome conquered 2,000 years ago was little Israel there by the Mediterranean Sea. The Roman armies came in, they brought all their military equipment, and they had the right at any time to summon a little Israeli worker out of the fields or wherever he was and order him to carry the military equipment 1 mile down the hot, dusty Jerusalem turnpike. Obviously, this was galling to many of the Jewish citizens, but the rule stayed in effect. It was along about this time that Jesus started his public teaching ministry, and one day he was having a question and answer session, perhaps on the hillside there by the Sea of Galilee, and a little Jewish peasant put his hand up and asked him about this 1 mile rule. And the question probably was, Master, do we have to continue to do this? We don't like doing it. Do we have to continue carrying that equipment 1 mile down the road? And the master teacher, according to Matthew 5:41, said, and I'm paraphrasing, no, you don't have to carry it 1 mile down the road. And there was probably a tremendous cheer on the hillside. And then there was a pause, and he finished by saying, no, carry it 2. And at that point in human history, the principle of the second mile was introduced here on planet Earth. I do not have to remind you that it is no more popular today than it was 20 centuries ago. It is a philosophy that has not really caught on. But I want to suggest tonight that you folks here who represent a broad cross path of society would consider for a moment that if the husbands did twice what was expected of them and the wives did twice what was expected of them, what might happen? And if the parents did twice what was expected of them and the children did twice what was expected, and the teachers did twice, and the students did twice, and the coaches did twice, and the athletes did twice, and the owners did twice, and the employees did twice, and the general did twice, and the private did twice. Listen, it would be a matter of days until the world in which you live in would be absolutely turned upside down. That is the principle of the second mile, doing twice what's expected of you. Two of my favorite athletes from the Boston area understood this principle. They used to say that Ted Williams was the greatest hitter in the history of baseball. Ted would just laugh at you, and in the middle of his career, Ted once said this: "It's practice that makes a hitter, conscientious practice." I say that Ted Williams has hit more balls than any guy living except maybe Ty Cobb. I don't say it to brag, I just state it as a fact. From the time I was 11 years old, I've taken every possible opportunity to swing at a ball. I've swung, and I've swung, and I've swung. And in my years with the 76ers in Philadelphia, I cannot tell you the number of times that Larry Bird of the Celtics broke our hearts, took a dagger and stuck it right in our hearts. I can't tell you the number of times. And in June of 1986, after the Celtics had won a championship, Larry Bird had won his third straight MVP award. He was talking to the writers about the upcoming summer, and he said, "I plan to take a 2-week break after the playoffs and then really work hard this summer. I've got to work on a few left-handed moves to make my game stronger. I'll come back next year and have 4 or 5 new moves, and they won't be able to stop me," said Larry Bird after his third straight MVP award. As we get to the top of the ladder, I want to tell you that the 8th rung simply says this: if you want your dreams to become a reality, never give up. You cannot stop too soon, because the victory goes to those people and those teams and those organizations who hang in there until the final gun has gone off. There is a tendency in our society to say, if I don't like this business thing, I can just quit. If college is too tough, I can just quit. If the marriage gets too hard, I can just quit. Folks, you can't quit. You're not allowed to. And I want to just make sure you understand that. When I was a senior at Wake Forest University in North Carolina, there was a freshman football player there who had arrived. He went on and had a wonderful career, later played pro football with the Chicago Bears. I ended up as the general manager of the Chicago Bulls, and our paths crossed again. And I got to know Brian Piccolo even better on that second go-round in Chicago. But it was that year, the 69-70 basketball season, that Brian Piccolo contacted cancer. It took his life very rapidly. In June of 1970, he was dead. But before he died, Brian Piccolo had a business card printed up that he handed to everybody he came in contact with, and the card simply said this: "You can't quit, it's a league rule. Can't quit, it's a league rule." I saw Sally Jessy Raphael interviewed not long ago on television. Somebody asked her about her life and her career and her talent, and when it came to talent, Sally Jessy Raphael just kind of laughed and said, "The only talent is perseverance. The only talent is perseverance." Listen, to those of us who weren't Rhodes Scholars or All-Americas or Miss Americas, I am greatly encouraged by that. The only talent is perseverance. Paul Harvey, when asked the secret of his success, said, "I get up when I fall down." And Anthony Newley, the actor, said, "Big shots are little shots who keep on shooting." I just want to remind you of this simple fact of physics, that water will boil at 212 degrees, but at 211 degrees, it is still just hot water. One extra little degree can make the difference between a liquid languishing in a pot and a bubbling cauldron of power, a full head of steam. And the 9th rung of our ladder simply says this: if you want your dreams to come true, you've got to live your life by the faith phenomenon. You've got to live your life by the faith phenomenon. And you say to me, what is the faith phenomenon? Well, not long ago, Reverend Walter Courtney put it this way. He said, faith is the divine cohesive that holds all good together. We bank by faith. We drive by faith. We buy by faith. We marry by faith. We educate our children by faith. We live by faith. We die by faith. Faith is a part of every area of life. And without faith, we can do nothing. And without faith, we are nothing. Faith is all important in every area where men and women are seeking to touch life constructively. It is important that we live by the faith phenomenon. And I just want to simply point out to you that the greatest demonstration of faith is to accept by fact that there is a loving God who cares for us, who has a unique and special plan for every one of our lives. And when we come to that awesome reality, when we accept this by faith, even though we can't touch or feel or be in the physical presence of God or His Son, Jesus Christ, but when we do that by faith, at that point, for the first time in our lives, we have the ability to live up to 100% of our maximum potential and become exactly the kind of men and women that God created us to be years ago. And when we come and face and deal with that reality, that's when our lives take on meaning and purpose, and we have the ability to live up to 100% of our maximum potential and become everything that God designed us when He created us. That's the first-class way of going through this life. It's the first-class way of going into the next one. And we do it by faith in God and His Son, Jesus Christ. One of my greatest interests in life is the study of the Civil War, the war between the states here in our country. And I am fascinated with that period of time in American history. Perhaps my favorite Civil War personality was the great Confederate General Thomas Jonathan Jackson. In fact, we have named one of our Korean sons Thomas Jonathan Williams after him. You would best remember him as General Stonewall Jackson. And General Stonewall Jackson and his courage in the midst of a conflict can be a lesson to everyone. Historian Mark Grimsley wrote, "A battlefield is a deadly place, even for generals. And it would be naive to suppose that Stonewall Jackson never felt the animal fear of all beings exposed to wounds and to death. But invariably, he displayed extraordinary calm under fire, a calm too deep and masterful to be mere pretense. His apparent obliviousness to danger attracted notice, and after the first Battle of Manassas in Virginia in July of 1861, someone asked him how he managed it. 'My religious belief teaches me to feel as safe in battle as in bed.' And then Jackson explained, 'God knows the time for my death. I do not concern myself about that, but to be always ready, no matter where it may overtake me.' And then General Jackson added pointedly, 'That is the way all men and all women should live, and then all would be equally brave.'